Hello everybody, welcome to the very first official full episode of the Cornerstone. I'm Dustin, I'm your host. Thank you for tuning in. Today we've posted two videos on our channel. First is sort of a channel introduction. If you haven't watched it yet, click right here, it'll take you over there and you can see what this channel is all about. Then when you're done with that, come back here, and what we're going to be talking about today is the basics of Christianity. This is not a question that I've fielded from you guys because I didn't give you a whole lot of notice before I started filming this. Instead, it's a question that I feel like a lot of people may wonder but not know how to ask. And it's a question that I think is very important to get out of the way before we go into deeper issues. Without further ado, welcome to the first episode of The Cornerstone. So today's question, like I said, it's my question. It lays a foundation for everything else that we're going to talk about. So what we're going to touch on today is a little bit of everything. So let's just go ahead and get started. The question that I've kind of condensed this down into is, what does it mean to be a Christian? Now, I feel like my answer to this is probably going to differ from, everybody else's. This isn't my opinion of Christianity necessarily, but it is what I feel like is at the base of all true Christianity. So, what does it mean to be a Christian? There are 3 points to this. And if you were doing an outline, you'd have, Roman numeral 1 and 2 and 3, but then there's going to be some points in between there. You can label them A or B, or just don't even take notes, because why would you even? Let's go ahead and get started here. What does it mean to be a Christian? First point is we believe. The natural question spiraling off of this one is, what do you believe? Now this I've broken down into 2 points. Let's just start the sinfulness of man. When we talk about the creation story, this is sort of the point we want to get across, that man is sinful, man has disobeyed God. But you don't really have to talk about creation in order to understand that. So what we're going to do is just think about people. You can think about yourself, you can think about your neighbors, you can think about your friends or your family, but the chances are that they have disappointed you, and the chances are very good, actually 100%, that they've disappointed God. So the first point of all of this is that man is sinful. That is to say that we have disobeyed God's commands and His rules and regulations for life. God himself boiled these down into 10 and said, here's the 10 commandments, gave them to Moses, said, if you can keep these, you're doing pretty good. But the fact is, nobody can keep them. And I feel like even if we boil it down to 1 and say, how many of you have lied? The answer is everybody. I think we would be hard-pressed to find somebody who had never lied in their entire life. That's a pretty common thing. If you're like, well, I haven't lied, then have you ever been jealous? Put something higher than God? Have you ever stolen anything or, God forbid, killed anybody? These are very common things that man deals with. Humanity is flawed, and we've all, if we're being honest here, realized how wrong we've been at one point or another. Mankind is inherently flawed, and that's the first point of Christianity, that none of us can live up to God's standards. He says don't lie, don't cheat, right? But we do, and we do it all the time, not just once in a blue moon, but literally all the time. But that doesn't really matter how often we do it. It's the fact that we have done it, that in our nature there is a sinful rebellion. If you want to use an illustration here, you have a child and the child reaches up for the hot pot on the stove and you say, don't touch it. Chances are that child is going to want to touch it even more now that you've said that. There's a natural rebellion that exists in all of us. I don't think I really have to talk about that for too much longer, because I think everybody kind of knows that man is flawed, that man makes mistakes. To err is human, right? So what does that bring us to? That brings us to the fact that it's impossible for a man to live up to God's standards. So how then can we as the creation live in harmony with the Creator? How can we, once we die, rejoin Him in paradise? Well, the truth is, if we can't keep His commands, then there's really not much hope. And that's where mankind was. We had no hope. And now here's our second point. The hope of man showed up 2,000 years ago in the form of Jesus Christ. Now, Jesus lived a sinless life. He's the only one to ever do this. And what I'm asking you in point 2 is to exercise a little bit of faith and assume that what the Bible says about Jesus is actually true, that he lived sinlessly. If that is the case, and we know how hard it is for man to do that, then he couldn't have been man. He had to be something else. And in this case, the Bible records he was the Son of God, and he is God. He is a part of this Trinity. I love the analogy of the courtroom. Life is a courtroom, and you're standing in front of God, and he says, look, you're guilty. And your punishment is eternity separated from me because you didn't want me. But hold on, I love you so much. This is God talking. I love you so much that my son, who can live sinlessly and doesn't have his own debt to pay, he will pay your debt. I mean, look at it like this. Your debt has to be paid somehow, and it can't be paid by a sinner because he has his own debt to pay. So it had to be paid by somebody who was sinless. So it only makes sense then that Jesus lived a sinless life and that he's offering to pay your debt for you. What he asks in return for this plea bargain, or whatever you want to call it, is from here on out, doesn't matter what you've done, from here on out, I want you to live according to my commands. I know what you're probably asking. Dustin, what are the verses that say that Jesus was sinless? Let's look at Hebrews 4:15. He was tempted in all ways as we were, yet without sin. 2 Corinthians 5:21, 1 John 3:5, and 1 Peter 2:21 through 24. That verse in 2 Corinthians is a great place to start. And I'm going to read it for you. It says, he made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, so that we might become the righteousness of God in him. We're given righteousness through Christ because he lived sinlessly. These are just a few examples in the Bible of talking about Jesus as sinless. Obviously, the prophecies of the Old Testament talk about the unblemished Lamb. Again, it's all dealing with sinlessness because it had to be that way. If Christ had sinned, he would have his own debt to pay. And if he had sinned, then he obviously could not have been God, because God can't sin. The gospel in a nutshell, the message of Christianity in a nutshell, and its most basic. 1, mankind is sinful and without hope. 2, Jesus was sinless and is our hope. That's all that we are really preaching. But at its most basic, what you must understand are those 2 points. They'll tell you everything that you need to know. Now let's go back to our main question. What does it mean to be a Christian? Point 2 is actually very simple, but our Christian communities and the way that Christians are presented in the media kind of confuses things. Point number 2 is that we strive. So point number 1, we believe. Point number 2, we strive. Basically what I mean by this is that we strive for perfection. When we accepted that plea bargain, he says, look, just live for me. So that's what we try to do. We strive for that. So I already touched on this a little bit. Let's look at Ecclesiastes 7:30, also Romans 7:18, and Philippians 3:12 through 14. Now these verses all deal with striving to do what is right. It's a very hard thing to do what is right. I just talked about the sinfulness of man. I mean, we are broken. We can't do everything right 100% of the time, but we can try. And I feel like that's really a big portion of what it means to be a Christian. I mean, yeah, we believe. You have to start there. If you don't believe it, none of the other 2 points will happen, but you then have to strive. As soon as you believe, you strive, and you say, okay, I'm going to try my hardest to live for Jesus. That's point number 2. So we believe, we strive. Point number 3 also ends in a VE. We love. Love is a tricky thing. Love is hard to see. You can see the effects of it, but it's hard to see love itself. In John chapter 13, verses 34 through 35, and again in 1 John 4:7, we're talking very strongly about love and what it means to love. 1 John 4:7 goes on to say, dear friends, let us continue to love one another, for love comes from God. Anyone who loves is a child of God and knows God. Christians are given a commandment to love everybody. People misread what Christians think sometimes, and we have, or are supposed to have, a very strong love for the people around us. Christians have a tendency to point out a sin or point out a flaw in somebody and magnify it and then seriously fault that person for that thing and keep them at arm's length when in fact the opposite should be in place. We should instead invite them closer and say, look, I love you and I want you to be happy, and I want you to have what I have, which is joy and peace, and that's sort of the love that we're supposed to have. We should love them as much as Christ loved us, which is a whole heck of a lot. You know, he lived a very tough life and then was put to death, a very humiliating and painful and torturous death, and he did that for us. So love is super important. Love is often forgotten. The 3 points again: we believe, we strive, we love. Those are the 3 points of Christianity. And then over on this side, what does a Christian believe? We believe that all mankind is sinful and therefore without hope, and that Jesus was sinless and therefore is our hope. I tried to make this as simple as possible, but I hope that it made a lot of sense to you, and that maybe it struck you in a different way than it ever has. Yeah, that does it for our first episode, and I think that kind of lays a really good foundation for where we're going to go next. And yeah, so here's the deal. If you have a question, if you want me to answer one of your questions, hit me up in the comments below on Twitter at the Cornerstone, but the O's are actually zeros. You can also email me at, what is it again? cornerstoneshow@gmail.com. Thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. Share it with your friends. Send it to your family. The more viewers we get, the more questions we get, the more videos I can make. That's about it. Enjoy your days. I don't know what time of the day you're watching this, so I don't know whether to say good morning or good evening, but nevertheless, I hope you have a good day. If the day is over, then have a good tomorrow. I will see you next week with a brand new video answering a actual viewer's question this time. And I will see you guys next Monday. God bless you.